And I realized how much the foundation of the positive thinking led towards an avoidance of anything that doesn't feel good. Now there's a common word, a phrase, this idea of spiritual bypassing for that, right? There also started to be more recently the conversation around toxic positivity. I don't know if you've heard
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I started looking more like, oh, yes, that was a byproduct in a way of being raised in this teaching, at such a young age, and having to be open enough to mature in my understanding of it and let go of the people pleasing, always happy rainbow persona.
Mhm. Hey, everyone. Let's start healing. I'm Adrienne Murchison, and welcome to episode 162 of the Let's Start Healing podcast. We have more in common than we think, and what we have in common can change the world. And I love the timing of this episode today. My guest is Reverend Rainbow Weldon, and she is the spiritual director of Ahava Center for Spiritual Living in Lexington, Kentucky. And centers for spiritual living are throughout the US. There's one here in Atlanta. There's probably one where you live. And they are churches, spiritual centers that are open to all people from all walks of life. And I think that it is so timely to have my conversation with her today because we are in such flux, I think, and I think many would agree right now. And something that I came across and that has been on my mind is how can spirituality help us approach divisive conversations with compassion? And I think that compassion is certainly something that runs throughout Rainbow's Center for Spiritual Living, throughout her church. And I think that's a really good question that has come up for me. How can we have compassionate conversations about our differences during this time? And it's a very divided time. And, I say we have more in common than we think, and what we have in common can change the world. And I think a lot of us want to change the world, or we wish the world would change right now. But the reality is, we are right here in this moment in time. And even I think the people that we find so hard to understand, people who may think so differently than you or may think so differently than me, they really have the same uh, wants when it comes to their family, when it comes to their well-being. They probably have the same worries when it comes to their loved ones and their own struggles that all of us can probably relate to. I like to say that we all bleed the same. If I love my parents, my late parents, as much as I'm sure someone else loves their parents. I love the people in my life as much as I'm sure you love the people in your life. And I think that's where we can come to a common place if we're willing to check things at the door, if we're willing to check our ideologies at the door and show up as human beings. That's how we can come together and maybe let some of these walls down. But it can be so hard, I believe, with the news or someone that we may encounter in passing, something we may see on social media. But the truth is, we all bleed the same, and we all have someone that we love, and we all have insecurities and worries. And we have things that are in common that are separate from politics. We have things in common that are separate from that. One thing that I believe that this time is calling us to do is to pay attention and to get connected to who you really are. And when you get to who you really are, when you go to that, the most authentic place inside of you, that's where God is. That's where you feel divinity. That's where you feel spirit. Whatever you call the most divine entity, whether you call that God, the universe, spirit, Allah, whatever you call that, when you go to the most intimate part of yourself and breathe and accept and acknowledge, that is when you feel that divine spirit. And that is where I believe we are called on to recognize and stand up in who we are, in what our individual purpose is. What is your purpose? Because you are here for a reason and you were created in love. You were created in love and you are here for a reason at this moment in time, not 50 years ago, not 50 years from now, in terms of where you are right now. You're meant to be here right now. Why? What is your purpose? Why are you here? Because we can't, no matter what, no matter what, this is not a passive time. This is not a time to not pay attention, not be involved. And when I say be involved, I mean in whatever your purpose is in love, whatever your role is in this life, in the spirit of love. This is not a time to not acknowledge that. It is not a time because this is about your well being, and your well being is not intended to be asleep. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't be here, and the people that we love wouldn't be here. So, let me share Ahava Center for Spiritual Living before I share with you about rainbow. Ahava is the Hebrew word for love. We are, and I'm actually reading from the website, we are an open and affirming spiritual community, speaking to Ahava. They are an open and affirming spiritual community that promotes global transformation through personal inspiration. They extend a warm welcome to all people in search of a spiritual community where they are embraced, affirmed, and accepted for who they are, and inspired and supported in achieving their highest potential. And Reverend Rainbow Weldon, she serves as the spiritual director and senior minister at Ahava Center for Spiritual Living. Originally hailing from Atlanta, where I am, Rainbow grew up steeped in new thought principles and practices. She was licensed as a practitioner in 2008, a minister in 2016, and ordained with the Centers for Spiritual Living in 2022. But those are just the facts. Rainbow's true passion lies in exploring the intersection between creativity and spirituality. As a young adult, she founded the Youth and Family Program at Bodhi Spiritual Center in Chicago, where she continued to serve in leadership in various capacities for 10 years, including as assistant minister. In her free time, Rainbow loves dancing, reading, listening to music and podcasts, yoga, hiking, and spending time with her wife, Heather, and their daughter, Cadence. That's a beautiful name, Cadence. Together, they enjoy exploring the beauty of the bluegrass region they gratefully call home. Before we get to my conversation with Rainbow, I want to invite you to subscribe to the podcast. Please like the episode. Please share Let's Start Healing with at least one person that you know. I bet you know someone who this podcast would resonate with. So please share Let's Start Healing with that person, with at least one person that you know. Well, let's get started. Let's meet Rainbow and let's start healing. Welcome, Rainbow.
Thank you for having me. So happy to be here.
I am so happy to have you here. Just thank you so much. And you were just saying that it's warming up a little bit where you are. We're in a chill.
Yes. You know, it's like I moved to Lexington, Kentucky from Chicago, and feels like I'm back in Chicago. We've been having 0 degrees some. We've had snow on the ground for weeks now. So
Yes. Well, you know what? Before we even go into a deep dive, would you share with listeners? You just pronounced the Spiritual Living Center as Ahava. I want to say Ahava, and you said it differently.
Ahava.
Ahava.
Yes. Like
Ahava.
I have an aha. That's one way to
Mm.
remember
Ah-
it.
Ahava.
Yes. And so ahava is the Hebrew word for love. And some people
Mm.
do say ahava, but we say ahava.
Yes. So share your church and with our listeners and share what it's all about.
Sure. So we are a spiritual center in Lexington, Kentucky. We are affiliated with a greater organization called Centers for Spiritual Living. And I have been involved in Centers for Spiritual Living, or the New Thought Science and Mind teaching, since I was a child. My parents raised me in that. And Ahava was founded, we just celebrated 15 years, and it was founded by a woman, Reverend Dr. Sunny Cantrell Smith. And she is currently the elected spiritual leader of the greater organization, so Centers for Spiritual Living. She brought me on about 5.5 years ago. That's a whole other story that I'd love to share later.
Yes.
Many synchronicities in that, but I came on about 5.5 years ago, and we did co-ministry, and this is now stepping into my 3rd year of spiritual leader, spiritual director, senior minister, that title.
Yes.
And she has moved on to serve the greater organization as well.
Have you seen the community grow in a significant way as a result of, I mean, I would say just from 2019, 2020, people have really become more open-minded, and even over the last 10 or 15 years, but it seems that a lot of I want to say new age spirituality, or however we want to phrase it, that it's more commonplace now, it seems like. And I'm wondering if you're seeing that in terms of how your church community has grown.
Yeah, you know, it's really unique because I do feel like these spiritual ideas are so much more prevalent and accepted and in our common language. Social media, YouTube has had a large part to do with that. Podcast as a way of getting the teachings out, and people hear things and resonate with that. One of the things that we hear most often when people first walk in the doors at Ahava is, wow, I didn't know there was a place that I could come where people think and believe like I do. So a lot of people discover this spiritual path kind of privately, right? Through books, maybe working one-on-one with a spiritual coach or someone, and then kind of starting to explore content online. But what is really unique about Ahava and other physical places of gathering as a spiritual community is that in-person connection that adds a whole other element to just learning and listening spiritual principles when you practice it in a community and when you're with people that have like similar values, but we're all human and we're all very different. There's people in our community that have different political perspectives. I really value, as did Reverend Sunny, diversity in all aspects. So different ages, races and cultures, economic backgrounds, gender, sexuality. We really are a place, as we say, where everyone is accepted and belongs, and you can come and be your authentic self. You can even bring your own spiritual background or practices that may be different than someone sitting across the room from you and still resonate with the spiritual principles and the teachings that we share. And we really encourage that. You know, like I did a new member class recently, and the question several people asked, well, is it okay if I consider myself more agnostic, or if I do this or believe in this too, or, you know, can I also practice some, you know, native spirituality or Wiccan or different? And I'm like, yes, like literally all are welcome. If you resonate with the community, the values that are being shared here, the universal spiritual principles that show up in many ways, if you're feeling attracted to this, you have a home here. And I do think that is something that is unique that I personally love because I love people and being together. And I think we can really go deeper in our spiritual practice in relationship and in community instead of
Yes,
just reading about it and talking about it.
right. And share more about that, what you mean about
Yeah.
going deeper in terms of our relationship with each other.
Yeah. So even something as simple as people on a volunteer team. And then you have people, stuff coming up like um, thinking that some people are maybe not giving as much as others, or uh, those in relationship personalities that we rub up against. Somebody says something and somebody says something else and feels like, oh, but we work it out because we know there's a foundation of love. In so many other places in our life, we may just say, I'm going to leave this relationship or this friendship or this person, or I'm just going to avoid this. We really create a container to honor our personalities and uniqueness and differences and grow together and talk about our spiritual practices in our everyday lives. And that's what happens really more in our classes and workshops, book studies. We take the teaching and we apply it in a very practical way in our lives. And it creates a really supportive environment where if people are willing to be vulnerable and to share and get that support and open themselves up, we can learn from each other, and we can learn from each other's examples and stories of, you know, not somebody saying, oh, you should try this, but like, well, for me, when I noticed this come up, I asked, oh, perhaps where am I feeling not good enough? Or, you know, noticing what that button or trigger may be within and using it as an opportunity to shift and heal and grow and awaken to a higher perspective.
Yeah, I so relate to that. I don't know if I mentioned to you that I study A Course in Miracles, and I've been studying it for almost 20 years. And before the pandemic, I was from 2008 to 2020, I was going to a spiritual discussion group every Sunday morning. And we were in a circle, and it was just what you described in terms of how we related to each other and the different types of backgrounds and
Yeah.
faiths and, you know, just cultures that were in this circle. And it really just opened me up. And I found that we could bond even if we had different perspectives it was a very trusting, loving, you could feel the spirituality in the air. You could feel the love. It was just so palpable by the time we got to the end of our time together on those Sunday mornings. So I really understand what you're saying. And it does bring people closer together. It does help you to be able to trust
Mm-hmm.
each other more and
Mm-hmm.
opens you up to communication. So how about themes that may come up at this point in time? It is this month of January. Just
Ooh.
someone said to me last night, this year came in hard,
Oh yeah,
you know?
hard and fast.
Right.
Woo!
And we are still in it. We are still in it. And I'm just, and even also, I'm in a email group, a daily spiritual email group. And someone was just talking about just the climate right now and the way that she's receiving it and experiencing it and just the weight that she's feeling. And I'm just wondering what types of themes and um, ideas are members of your community talking about?
Yes, it is definitely a big part of the conversation right now, with everything that's occurring politically, with there being so much divisiveness, so much separation and fear and projection and judgment being outpictured in the world. And so, with a large amount of the people in our community that identify in one way or another, perhaps as a group that is more marginalized systemically, or being affected by some of the proposed laws and changes. A lot of people are scared and confused. Other people are frustrated and angry and upset, hurting for others. And on top of all of that, coming together to say, okay, so what is ours to do, right? How do we navigate being authentic with those feelings and not spiritually bypassing, and hold the vision of the world we wish to see? Doing the inner work so that we can be in that place to create on a collective level, which we desire, a world that's more equitable, where peace and unity and love and joy and freedom and harmony are honored for all people, all beings, including our planet. So there is a large aspect of sacred activism in the community, and taking personal responsibility, doing our own work, but not doing it just to like manifest the good things in our life, but in order to share that love and to be in that position to help others in need, and to know that sometimes we may be the one in need. And how can we be willing to ask for support when we need it, give when we have the availability to give? And it really takes the willingness of those in the community to be vulnerable and to participate in both of those ways. Because sometimes it's natural for people to want to withdraw when they're not quite feeling as yay, because it is a very kind of positive spirituality teaching that can have you come together on a Sunday morning, and we have the music and the inspirational message and the celebration and the love and the hugs, that sometimes people are like, oh, I'm not feeling that, I'm just going to stay home. And what I've really been encouraging in the space that we have been shifting towards is one where wherever you are, show up and get the love.
Mm,
Just show up. If
that's
you show up
powerful.
in your pajamas because you barely could get up that day, but you showed up, we are here for you. And honoring all the feelings, honoring that somebody may be walking in from whatever they just experience feeling some sort of way. So how to create an environment that honors all of that? It's tricky. The day we've we're kind of being inspired in the moment with what the community needs. So the day of let's see, going back to, I guess, the day after the election. So the day that morning, when the election
Mhm.
results were out, we opened the space. I was like, hey, I'm going to be here from noon to 3, called on some other leaders who could be there in the evening. No agenda, just show up, be yourself, whatever you're feeling. It will be a space to be together in this place of love and to feel your feelings. So it's like, we're not coming together to just complain or blah, blah, vent. You could do that with your friend anytime. And we're not coming together to just walk in and we're just going to meditate and pray and zone it out. We're going to come and we're going to like, oh, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling that. I mean, people walked in the doors and I just gave them a hug, and several people just, kind of wept in my arms and just like, oh, I didn't even know I needed that release of just the comfort of someone, right? And then the conversations were kind of all over, and I know some people were like, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to organize? What are we going to do? And other people were like, I'm not there yet, and so just kind of navigating that space for everyone. Then similarly, the night of the inauguration, we hosted a watch event. We had people come, and I like to we have coffee and tea and some popcorn and get out snacks. Food can be something we can be very healing and nurturing as well. And just creating that really community and a space for community to gather. So yes, our main big thing is a Sunday morning experience. We have a Wednesday night online meditation and discussion group. We have classes and workshops. What the community is, what I'm noticing and wanting to provide more, the community is needing now is a space to be together, to be vulnerable, authentic, share, support, and just be with others that they can feel safe with when
Mhm.
sometimes the world is starting to feel a little less safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I want to end, I also, it's like, I want to create a context and a space for the vision and the hope to drive us forward, and communicate the need for self-care and all of that. So there's so much nuance. There's a little bit of everything. But that's where I feel like the unique space we're providing and what we're talking about doing starting next week and somewhat ongoing too is just having more nights and times to be open for people to come together, share, maybe
Yeah.
share some of the bills or the things, because there's stuff happening on the state level too that especially are affecting the trans community, the LGBT community, and other people in our community at Ahava might not be aware of that. So then we can share the information, let people know this is why, some people may be feeling some sort of way. We're going to hold the vision for what we desire. We can use our spiritual practices. We can also say, what do you need?
Mhm.
How can we be of support? And there may not be an answer,
Yeah.
but just being there and being heard and seen and acknowledged. And, they say even just existing is an act of resistance sometimes when you live
Mm.
in a body that is othered. So
Yeah.
just walk in the room as
Yeah.
who you are in a place that people say you're loved and accepted here. That I think in itself is profoundly healing.
Absolutely, absolutely, and is that what you mean? You're saying some powerful words as you're talking. You're dropping some powerful words, and one thing you said was sacred activism. Is that what you were just describing? Is that what that is?
So yes, I'd say sacred activism is being guided by that divine presence and taking action. So
Yeah,
it
that's what
is
I call that spiritual activism for me. That's what I feel like I am.
exactly, right?
Spiritual
So
activist.
yes, it's not just the activism that is the organizing and the protesting and, on the streets kind of a thing. Not that there's anything wrong with that. We need that. But what's unique about sacred activism or doing that type of activism within a spiritual community is that spiritual aspect of remaining grounded,
Mhm.
open to love and oneness, and having the approach of letting our voice be heard, asking those questions of what is mine to do, and then moving into inspired action, coming from a place of what we desire as opposed to what we are against, and holding that vibration of love to see the wholeness and truth back of the current conditions.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of paradox in that, and it takes that being steeped in your own practice enough to stay grounded in
Yeah.
the face of those things, and to say, "Hmm, I know this is not the truth of who I am. I know this is not the truth of humanity. Love is what is real." Hold those truths and then ask, okay, so what is mine to do now? How can I move into action? Um, and what that looks like practically is different things. We do have a food pantry at Ahava that is becoming more of kind of a resource, mutual aid type thing. So people have started donating clothes and other type things. We're putting together other resource needs. And that is an example of putting to practice meeting those very real needs of people, because poverty is also a very big concern in this region and area. And I know really all over.
Everywhere.
I mean, like I was at
Yeah.
the store the other day and somebody walked in. Their first question to the cashier was, "How much are your eggs?" And they're like, $6.50. And she's like, "Oh," and I was like, "I know. I
Yeah.
haven't bought eggs in a month."
Yeah. I mean, and right now because I'm a journalist, I mentioned to you, and I just was writing about uh, the freezing of federal funding for refugees.
Mhm.
And in talking with one of the nonprofits that provides millions of dollars in services through the federal government to refugees,
Mm.
not only are they going to be suffering, but the organization has, I believe, more than 200 employees.
Wow.
So, I
Everything has a
mean,
ripple effect,
yeah,
right?
everything has a ripple effect. And just before we got on, here there's in Kennesaw, there's a town center mall, and I
I
saw a
grew up right
headline.
there.
Huh? Would you
I
say?
I grew up right there. So when you
What?
said I grew up in Kennesaw, and that
Yes.
I worked at that mall, my first job. Sorry.
So I'm so
Nostalgia.
glad you said that, because I just saw a headline that said that the mall had to close because of high power bills. So I did not read the story yet. I assume it's temporary, but
Yeah.
that is something.
Yeah.
That is really something. So that's affecting all the stores,
Yes.
employees, throughout all the stores. And something that I do want to acknowledge also is that this is, to me, a more stark time than in 2016,
Mhm.
because I remember in 2016 there was still a lot of hope. There was still people who wanted to form discussion groups that I would write about or be a part of to, excuse me, discuss differences. And there were
Mhm.
people who wanted to say, well, I'm not divisive. I want to know about people who don't look like me.
Right.
And there was just, um, even though people might not have been happy with the outcome of the election then, it just seemed like there was more uh, hope.
Mhm.
But now, I mean, we've been through a pandemic, there's inflation, and then people are, I think, afraid, like you said, of their own safety.
Mhm.
And just being out and about for some people could be a scary notion.
Yeah.
So it's just a different time.
It is, and I think that, one of the bigger themes that's going on, if I were to look at this as what's the opportunity, right? What's the growing edge for humanity in this current climate? And I really think it is for us to embody our sovereignty, our agency, our personal power now more than ever. So as systems begin to crumble, things that we used to trust and have faith in are perhaps no longer trustworthy, or people are just more afraid or skeptical whether there's a valid reason or not. The opportunity in that is to remember that within me, that divine presence is the source and substance of my supply, is the place to source my true freedom and sovereignty. And what does that look like in the face of legislators and laws and things that are trying to literally take away people's right to exist
Yeah.
in humanity,
Yeah.
um who, these laws of shipping people out because it's racism, it really is. It's the fear of the other. And
Mhm.
the more that we can lean into teachings of oneness, wholeness, personal empowerment, I think that's where the
Yeah.
shift is going to occur on the collective. And so those of us already kind of on the leading edge of this, who are been steeped in this for many years, or even if we're just kind of newer to this awakening spiritual journey, practicing our presence now, more than ever is needed to be grounded and steeped in the truth of who we are, so we can walk in the world and see things happening, not as a victim or something's happening to me, or now this has
Yeah.
been taken away from me, or I'm no longer as valid because this person said that. No,
No.
I can't give away my power to any politician or anyone like that. And it's the both and,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Again, we don't want to say that those things in the world don't have an impact, because then that can lead to saying complacency and just not doing anything
Yeah.
about it. But doing it from a place of wholeness and oneness, because we are all one, and there is that ripple effect. And so we can see, some of us, more of that bigger picture. And I think that's what also we're being called to do, to move beyond
Yes.
the me and mine personal success to how can we
Yes.
all succeed. So those are the two gifts I think and hope humanity can come to as the
Yeah.
evolution of consciousness is occurring. And we're in the very messy stages of learning through contrast, of learning and experiencing enough pain and suffering from experiencing anything other than that, till enough people can wake up and say, hey, this isn't right, this doesn't work. And sometimes we have to learn the hard way, and I'm
Yeah.
talking about as a collective, uh, in order to have a shift of perspective.
Yeah, I just love the way that you put everything, because I think we are in such a hard contrasting time, and I have to remind myself that sometimes this has to happen. We've been through worse, even
Yeah.
though in my lifetime I haven't experienced it. I know that we have been through worse in our country, and sometimes it'll look like this or feel like this before there's a breakthrough.
Right.
But I do think people are called on to be accountable, to connect with that divine part of themselves and to not sleepwalk.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's not what we're here to do.
Mm-hmm.
We
Exactly.
right.
Yes, what we say at Ahava is wake up, step up, make a difference.
Yes,
So,
yes,
waking up, not just sleepwalking through our lives, right? But waking up to
exactly.
the awareness of who we are, paying attention to the thoughts, the words, the things that we say, what we're placing our energy and attention on, in order to actually then know who we are and move into action and
Yeah.
make a difference.
Well, so will you share your spiritual path to where you are now? And I know that this spiritual thought, this spiritual mindset has been yours throughout your entire life. This is how you grew up, right?
Yes. It's still been a journey, let me say that. It's like, so I was raised in science of mind, and there is a center. It's still there in Atlanta, the Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta. And my parents found that along with my aunt back in the early 80s. And the idea, also if you think about the 80s and moving into the 90s as well, it was very much the positive thinking, the affirmations, right? So I
Mhm.
was a very positive kid, and I learned these spiritual principles and teachings, law of attraction, law of cause and effect, change your thinking, change your life. I was meditating at 5. I was learning there's a particular form of affirmative prayer that is a practice that is taught specifically through Centers for Spiritual Living, based on Ernest Holmes, who is the founder of this philosophy. He created this formula of this really kind of spiritual technology called spiritual mind treatment. And I learned this as a young child, and so I could tell you the steps, and I would do my treatments. And especially as a child, when you have that more pure consciousness, right? Like, I hadn't have as many life experiences or things to absorb in my consciousness to create some of those blocks. It was really pure, and it was a really, like, yes, I can know the truth. I can know that love, that God, that peace, wholeness, abundance exists. That is who I am. I can know this for myself, for you. Speak this word into existence, and so it is. And then, through my young adult journey, and different things happen in life, and I'm not immune to the struggles of life. Uh, the biggest shift in healing, I would say, is really integrating the knowledge of the practice with the practice of the practice in hard times, right?
Yes, yes.
And I realized how much the foundation of the positive thinking led towards an avoidance of anything that doesn't feel good. So
Oh.
I was really not able to get in touch with my own anger or sadness and some of these things that I would, yeah, just put away when, like,
Mhm.
nope, that's not positive, and I can just turn right to this. Now there's a common word, a phrase, this idea of spiritual bypassing for that, right? There also started to be more recently the conversation around toxic positivity. I don't know if you've heard
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I started looking more like, oh, yes, that was a byproduct in a way of being raised in this teaching, at such a young age, and having to be open enough to mature in my understanding of it as I grow and mature a as a person, and have
Mhm.
experiences of different relationships and breakups and moving and,
Yes,
jobs not working,
yeah.
grief, death, how to accept all of that and let go of the people pleasing, always happy rainbow persona.
Mhm.
And first, it was even to recognize that I had that persona
Yeah.
and to begin to do the work myself to
But wasn't that, did that feel after you started doing the work, did you find that when you were in just the positive thought that that was kind of heavy, even though it was positive? Because isn't that kind of a weight that you're carrying,
yeah.
having not been able to process and release it?
Yeah, it would be like this. It really, like, I got really good at, um, the term that's used now, kind of masking, right? Like looking like this in a situation and feeling heaviness in my chest, tightness in my throat, almost like a welling in the back of my eyes from the grief that was not expressed,
Wow.
tension in the shoulders. So, getting in touch with my body and beginning to do the work of really feeling and noticing those sensations and feeling my feelings, that was something I really didn't start doing until my late 30s.
Mhm.
So, I had been raised in this teaching. I studied theater in college. From there, I moved to Chicago as a very young adult, 21, started working, doing children's theater and running the youth program at the Center for Spiritual Living there in Chicago. So I've always been kind of in this work. So really, if you count from when I started doing youth direction till now, I've been in this kind of spiritual leadership ministry work for uh, over 20 some years now.
Mhm.
But it was about halfway through that time,
Yeah.
uh, that it just there's a deeper and a deeper and deeper understanding of the teachings and the practices, and that piece around integrating and accepting and loving all of who I am, even the messy parts,
Yeah.
and being willing to feel the feelings and learning some of the tools. I've also always been a dancer and a mover. So really I was a dancer that led me more into theater.
Yeah.
Theater led me more into children's theater, which led me into youth ministry, which led me into
Oh.
ministry.
Oh.
And now I am getting more in touch with that movement side of myself. One of the things that it has mixed reactions, as my community would tell you, but we're going to start to implement it again with a more context. But I implemented a part of service that I call a moment of embodiment. Kind of near the end of service, after we've done the message, we've heard the music and the prayers and all this. Now, most people just sit there like this for an
Mhm.
hour. Let's get up and move our body.
Yeah.
Something often I see the tears, I see the emotions come up. I'm very empathic as well. I can feel the energy in the room shift. And it's like, we need to move this through. Or because I've been there, we'll just disengage from our body and we won't truly integrate the
Yeah.
teaching or message. And we'll just walk out into the room, drink our coffee, ha ha, ha, forget about everything we just heard. So, especially if it's an uncomfortable message. So the moment of embodiment, we put on some music. Sometimes I call it Club Ahava. And I encourage people to move their body in whatever way feels good, to notice where there might be a stuck sensation and get in touch with that. Maybe just put your hands there. And, it could be a subtle movement. It could just be exploring
Yeah. Are
a
they
little.
breathing? Are they doing breath work as well?
Yes, all of that. Get in
Mhm.
touch. I often, through a Sunday morning experience, because I need it, will be like, let's take a breath,
Yeah.
right? All of that. And then this past year, we've brought in a woman who has facilitated some movement practices, ecstatic dance. We've done some work around the chakras and energies, and we're going to start, like I said, giving a little bit more context to that practice and encouraging more people, because I get that for a lot of people, it's very uncomfortable, especially if they think of it as dancing. And it's
Mhm.
not dancing.
Yeah.
It's
It's
moving
moving.
energy. It's moving
Exactly.
energy in our body so we can let out whatever came up that's like, oh, literally needs to get out of there, and we can settle in and get in touch with our body, because like I said, for me, that's where the healing came, when I would notice this all the time, but I started noticing those subtle physical things,
Mhm.
that when I gave the space and the willingness to sit and be like, "Okay, spirit, what is this about?" There was a lot of grief there that still needed to
Wow.
be expressed.
Well, let me ask you, when do you personally feel your connection to God, where you feel like you are in communication and an exchange with
Mhm.
God or Spirit, the Holy Spirit?
Several things. So I was nature, and I'll elaborate a little bit more, but definitely in nature, m music, the vibration of music, really, also I've always kind of been like, almost like like a channel writing, kind of journaling, kind of listening to spirit thing. When I was a teenager, I read the Conversations with God book, and that kind of
Me too.
flow, right?
Mhm.
I was like, "Oh, I do this, but I don't know I do this. Just think I'm talking to my journal." But yet these insights come when I just start asking questions in my journal. Oh, and with nature, and this is something that recently I've been really getting in touch with again. Kentucky's beautiful, by the way. There's so many places to go hiking in where I live here in Lexington. Within 20 minutes to an hour, there's multiple places. So water and creeks and mountains. Hiking stills my mind enough that I can start to, like, I'm moving my body, that my mind can, it's one of the few places my mind can actually start to get a little quiet. Because if you
Mhm.
can't tell, I'm very
Yeah, yeah.
thoughts and ideas, and creativity has been one of my driving values since I was young, and I can always be thinking and talking and da da da, but the stillness, and yes, I've been listening to guided meditation since I was 5 on my little pink cassette player. Sitting still to meditate is hard for me, and it's something I've been doing my whole life. So I've learned to stop trying to fit a round peg in a square hole or whatever,
Mhm. Yes.
and to expand. I definitely recommend anyone interested in cultivating a deeper type of mindfulness meditation practice, the Ram Dass's book, Journey of Awakening.
Uh-huh.
He talks about all these different types of meditation. So for me, I started realizing moving my body is a meditation, just to sacred music. Um, Doodling or coloring
Yeah.
mandalas also gets me in that zone. Chanting, um, there's a few
Yes.
chants. So I've studied and practiced a good bit with the Ho'oponopono, forgiveness.
Mhm.
So that, I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, is one of my defaults when I'm in a situation where I'm like, logical mind doesn't know what to do right now. That's kind of an internal
Yeah,
guide prayer,
yeah.
or in, meetings or certain things where I just want to kind of hold space. As well as another one I'll share is more from the Science of Mind, Ernest Holmes writing, which is, there's only one life. That life is God. That life is perfect. That life is my life now. And chanting those 4
Ooh,
statements over and over.
I love that.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that before.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that before.
So there's
So
so many things, but yeah,
yeah.
nature particularly, because I also love finding the awe in the small and the grand. So when I'm hiking, I stop and I'm in gratitude. I thank the trees I touch. I'm like, oh, like I just get to that place, and I'm sure there's the chemical thing going on in the brain, like the runner's high after you get, exercising for a little bit. But everything just looks so beautiful. And I really have that uh, childlike ability still to see the awe and the beauty of nature in the very smallest thing. And sometimes I'll just sit with a very little something
Mhm.
and notice that pattern, say in like the fern leaf or something, and then like look up and be like, wow, and begin to just contemplate the vastness of the universe, and then think again how all of that is within me, and yet so much more than me.
Yeah.
And like sacred geometry, blows my mind. Stuff like how different foods are good for, like, walnuts are good for your brain and they look like a brain. Those kind of things, like, just I
Yeah.
love that kind of stuff. I'm like, "That's so cool."
I love how you shared, thank you for sharing that, and also how some people can't sit still. I was thinking about a friend, and she would so vibe with what you described of she just sitting still and going into a meditation doesn't necessarily work for her.
Mhm.
And so doing some kind of movement or
Yep.
something else. So there's different things that can work for people.
Mhm,
So I,
mhm.
I really love and appreciate you sharing that. So one of the questions that I like to ask guests, if you're willing to share,
Mhm.
is there a miracle or a blessing that has taken place in your life where you said, that's that's completely God or spirit. I had nothing to do with that.
Hmm. Yeah, so many. Like, I feel like, I it's like, if there's a willingness just to reflect on my life and how so many things that's like, I would never have imagined that this would be where I am today, or how things come together. But, um, I think I'll share with literally how I got to be here in Kentucky. Um, so I was doing a lot of visioning. So this is another spiritual practice that we teach through Centers for Spiritual Living. It's different than visualization, which is picturing what you want. It's a practice that really was created by Michael Bernard Beckwith, the Agape Spiritual
Mhm.
Center, and it's the idea of kind of opening up to spirit's highest vision for our life, and almost like getting in that meditative state, but asking these series of questions and letting it be revealed, the highest vision. So I was visioning around my self as a spiritual teacher. What's the highest vision for being of service, of my unique gifts and talents in the world, sharing? What does this look like? What is mine to become? What do I need to release, embrace? You know, doing that process. And through that process, um, this symbol came. So sometimes it could be images, words, pictures. Like I said, I usually write a lot and sometimes draw or see things that I try to draw. But the symbol came that I now would call a wagon wheel. I call it like a spoke at first, right? So it's like a, you know,
Mhm.
circle with the
Yeah.
middle with the different. So that became my symbol of I'm on the right path. And, when you open yourself to see things, you start to see them more. They may have always been there, but you see them more because you're open to see them. And then, we're always making the meaning of what it is. But that started to point me in the thing where I would be like, okay, like confirmation, like, yes, I'm in the right direction. So I'd been serving at Bodhi Spiritual Center in Chicago for many years at that point, and I was at that time looking to stretch my wings, and I was ready to serve and lead my own community, right? To move into not just the assistant kind of position, but the spiritual leader position, and decided to go on this road trip, check out different centers, see, really open, like, where do I want to live? Where would be the best fit for my family? Where's the best community to serve? And this and that, the other. So really being open to that. Well, Lexington, Kentucky was not on my list originally. It was the first place I stopped because it was halfway from where I was living in Chicago to Atlanta, Georgia, where I was going to visit my family. Um,
What year was this?
this was the end of 2018. And it was November that I left Chicago. So I was heading kind of south, was going to spend a little time around the holidays in Atlanta. And then I had some other places tracked out on the West Coast, up in Arizona, New Mexico, California, Seattle, and then kind of back down and around. So start the journey, go to the first stop here in Lexington, Kentucky. I've driven through Kentucky a number of times because of that Chicago to Atlanta drive, but usually through Louisville. I hadn't been kind of over to Lexington as much. And so show up here just kind of thinking of it more as a gig on the journey. And I walk in the doors at Ahava, and the first thing I see in front of me, about the same size of my artwork behind me here, is a wagon wheel. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I take a picture, I do my little Instagram, like, hey, I'm on my path. This is my guidance, right? Thank you, Spirit. And then I go, and Reverend Sunny invites me into her office, and there's this beautiful quilt with all these wagon wheels. And then there's this other thing framed with, and I'm like, does this mean something to you? Because it means something to me, and I'm just wondering what it means to you, you know? And she's like, oh, yes, I will talk about it, you know? So then we do the service and everything. And then afterwards, and she was like, okay.
So wait, were you a part of the service, a part of the
I was there as the guest speaker.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so wait. So you stopped there spontaneously. Is that right?
I had arranged to be the guest speaker
Okay.
on this journey, but it
Gotcha.
was not a place that I was considering
Considering.
or interviewing, or knew that there might be, like some other places I knew that they were looking for a minister.
Okay.
Right. And then to fill out my journey, there's other places I was just going to be a guest speaker.
Right.
And then take some time to kind of figure out where to go. So this one was just kind of like a gig. And so then Reverend Tony started talking to me after, and she's like, well, and I'm like, so what does this mean to you? She's like, I don't know, are you ready to hear it? I'm like, well, yeah. And she says, well, that symbol came to me in my visioning when I was out in California. She studied ministerial school with Michael Beckwith, and she had studied with Mark Anthony Lord, who was my minister and teacher in Chicago. So lots of, just those little connections.
Yes.
She's like, this symbol kept coming to me, and it was how I knew that I wanted to come back here. She grew up in this region, to my roots, and found a spiritual center. So what I found out at the time that makes this all make a little bit more sense is Lexington is laid out, the city itself, like a wagon wheel. So there's this road called New Circle, and then there's downtown in the middle, and then there's these different main roads that are kind of like spokes. And it's very confusing because the same road going north has a different name than it has going south. They all change names in the middle.
That's Atlanta.
So I'm like, oh, okay, interesting. Wow. And then she starts telling me more that she's been looking to bring on someone, and the ministry is expanding. I'm like, okay, well, yeah, we can talk, but I don't know. I'm kind of ready to really step into that position, the leadership position, and not be another assistant or whatever.
But you're saying that you are ready to do that and not be another assistant.
Right. But yes. She was looking for an assistant. And I was like, yeah. And she's like, well, you go on your journey, go to your little places, go do your thing. She's like, but I guarantee you there won't be another wagon wheel. I was like, okay, Sonny. And, so obviously we had a great connection, stayed in touch, to spare all the long details. Ended the journey again back at Ahava, but at this point we had started talking more, and we had started talking more about the position growing and expanding over time, and with her desire to retire at a certain point, and knowing that I was like, okay, so I could see myself in this position and growing, that it wasn't going to be an always forever
Right.
assistant. And where I am today and now, thank goodness, right? That was definitely a
Yeah.
God thing. Going through the pandemic and all the rules changing about church and the spiritual community,
Oh, right.
and as a co-minister, was such a blessing instead of doing it totally alone, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Having the guidance and the mentorship and the opportunity to serve with someone else through some really challenging times, and to learn another, like I had been at other centers, but to learn another approach to leadership as
Yeah.
well. So I had more to learn. Like, yes, I was ready and I had more to learn, and I was willing to follow that guidance, even though my ego, my brain, so it was kind of about like, oh, but this other opportunity, it seemed cooler, right?
Yeah.
Like it was in a place that was more uh, exotic because I hadn't lived in that area yet.
Mhm.
Those kind of things that seemed more intriguing. But the value of being here, being closer to family, became so much more important than I realized at the time. And the growth of being as assistant and then co-minister and
Yeah.
then spiritual director was definitely the right path. And so just being willing to listen to those voices of spirit, to follow that guidance, to question, is this what my ego wants or what my heart wants, and allow spirit to be the guide and to make those decisions from that heart place,
Yeah.
was a huge
What I mean,
gift.
that is such a beautiful blessing, miracle. I love love that story. And what it also says to me, is the importance of doing the work for all of us, whatever our respective work is, because I imagine if you hadn't, when you got to that place in yourself, in your life, where you wanted to be more connected and, you know, not just be positive, but get in touch with the other things that you were feeling, I imagine that opened you up to be open to, the what was coming to you in your visioning, and to
Mhm.
follow and be guided
Right.
regardless of ego and everything, like to allow yourself to be really guided. And to me, it's such an example for all of us of the work that we should do on ourselves. And
Mhm.
it's a process, it's a journey. We learn one thing and then there's something else we have to
Oh,
we,
yeah.
we have to learn. But it just is wow, what a concrete, beautiful blessing and miracle. I
Yeah.
mean, you're standing in your truth, it's that's really wonderful. So, well, I so appreciate you sharing everything that you have. I mean, you've shared a lot of practices and given a lot of insight. If someone wants to get in touch with you, can they email you? What would
Yeah.
be what would be good?
Yeah, so you can email me at rainbow@revrainbow.com, or rainbow@ahavacenter.com. So those are my 2 places to find me. Also on social media at Rev Rainbow, and I also encourage you to check out Ahava at Ahava CSL, and on our YouTube page, especially for Ahava, we stream our weekly content on there, and we have some other playlist of meditations and shorts and clips and readings and different inspirational things on that channel, and we're starting to focus on that more as a way to outreach beyond, still having that sacred in-person community, but doing more things with technology and hybrid classes and workshops and book studies for both people in the room and online at the same time, and growing that online presence as well. So yes, find me online in all the places at Rev Rainbow or at Ahava CSL.
Wow. And share, if you will, your name Rainbow. Did your mother name you Rainbow? It's just the perfect name.
Yes,
And what's
it
the meaning? What's
is.
the symbolization of it?
It's funny. I wish I could say that it had a deeper. I mean, I know it has a deeper meaning, but the story goes, my parents named me, and they really felt and assumed that they were going to have a boy, and they had a name picked out, a family name, and it was kind of, getting later in the pregnancy, and uh, my mom was like, "Well, what if it is a girl? What should we name her?" And they were decorating my nursery at the time with a rainbow theme. So this is the late 70s. And the wallpaper said rainbow on it in rainbow colors. And my dad just looked at the wall and he said he felt like my spirit was talking to him and said, "What if we name her Rainbow?" And it's kind of ironic, if you knew my parents, to know that my dad said that, because he was a pharmacist, very left brain, very analytical, very quiet man. My mom, big, creative woman, but he was the one that said, "Let's name her Rainbow." And mom was like, "I kind of like that." And then, of course, like my aunt and my grandmother were like, "Oh, you can't do that to that child." Like, "What do you think?" And they're like, "No, no, no, we're gonna name her Rainbow." I can't imagine being anything other than
No,
Rainbow now, and
no.
it certainly fits. And when I was younger, my middle name is Louise, which is a family name, my
That's
mom.
you're named after your mom, right? I didn't
Yes.
know that your middle name was
Yes,
Louise.
yes, and I named my daughter Cadence Louise, carrying on that middle name. And
Beautiful.
when I was younger, I would be like, "Well, maybe when I'm adult, I'll go by Louise because it'll be more, serious." And I thought, like, as an adult, that's what you're supposed to do. But no, I'm just not ever gonna be that serious adult. I have to keep that playful rainbow energy going. So I was named after wallpaper. There wasn't some rainbow on the day of my birth. I don't know. But yes, people are always like, "Were your parents hippies, or what were they smoking, or what did they, or is it like a religious name? Was it about, God's covenant?" It's like, nah, wallpaper.
God's covenant. And it's something when you describe your dad and your mom, and the fact that he came up with the name, it speaks to me their compatibility. There was something compatible in them being different or opposites
Very
on the
opposites,
surface.
yes. And they would often say that I got the best of both, but I definitely saw very different ways of living life and being in life. And I see battles within myself sometimes, those two aspects.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so very much. This has been absolutely wonderful.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for having me and doing this show and bringing more inspiration and healing and this kind of high vibe conversation to the
Thank you.
world. Mhm.
Thank you. Well, I so enjoyed that conversation. Thank you for joining us. I want to remind you to subscribe to Let's Start Healing and like the episode. Please share Let's Start Healing with at least one person that you know. Until next time, let's start healing.